In this week's show, we'll be discussing whether mobile games are being unfairly censored and whether or not the creators of a technology such as encrypted messenger apps have any moral responsibility in their use.
And of course, all the latest controversy from the tech world. Apple makes a U-turn on gaming nudity.
While Apple does not restrict music or books that you can buy through its digital stores, games and apps must live up to a different standard.
A very interesting mobile game that's been caught up in this recently is Papers, Please, a superbly crafted exploration of morality versus progress.
In Papers, Please, players take on the role of a border control agent working for a fictional, totalitarian country. Players are tasked with performing banal duties associated with processing immigrants into the country, including the use of a full body scanner that shows the immigrants and travellers with pixelated nudity.
The purpose behind this is to make the player realise just how easily they can humiliate people in the name of security.
And while Apple initially banned nudity from the game for its App Store release, following a backlash from the gaming community at large, Apple have now reversed its decision and will allow the feature as part of an app update. As without nudity, the feeling of humiliating and degrading incoming citizens as a state actor is all but lost, which is key to the powerful message hidden behind the title. So Luke, do you think that games and now by association apps are being unfairly censored in comparison to books and films?
Here we go, deep breath. I think because books and films are passively consumed, it's not looked at in the same light as actively killing, stealing, or committing sex crimes. But here's the one thing video games do have going for them in this argument. It's not real. It's so not real. You are shooting pixels at pixels. There is nobody getting harmed and no harm being done by anybody. Your ability to filter reality from fiction is what's necessary here, and only very few violent psychopaths lack that ability. You have no reason to empathise with pixels. 32.5 million copies of GTA 5 have been sold, and we've seen nowhere near even 10 people coming forward blaming their violent criminal tendencies on this game. Worse things have happened in real life every day. The active or passive consumption of violent media is actually a great cure for the itch. Men aren't designed to live in, sanitized, friendly manner all the time. It's not in our genetics. This is a virtual outlet and probably prevents more crimes than it causes. In terms of games such as Call of Duty, glamorizing the military and heavily supporting the arms industry because they pay royalties to arms dealers to use specific gun names, maybe that should be something that we address. But the basic principles of sex and violence, it's the backbone of human animalistic instinct, but perhaps not of society, and maybe that's the problem. They don't make these games because people don't want them to happen. The market has spoken. There's obviously, age ratings on games. If the game's an 18, don't let a child play the game. I don't think it entitles parents to, tell the other 77% of the population how to live. I know a lot of concerned parents, which predominantly, this is, who think that we're asking you to constantly monitor your child's, use of computers and use of video games. And in modern society, it's very difficult to do. But what we're actually asking is just to educate your child in a way that it knows the difference between fiction and reality, which it should, and that comes naturally anyway, doesn't it? So in terms of nudity, bring it on for whatever purpose you want. It's a cultural bias and snobbery to allow primetime TV shows such as EastEnders, all these Coronation Street, to use and allow murder and rape storylines. And that's not even active consumption. In video games, they aren't portrayed as real people. These people in soaps, it's almost reality TV nowadays. They try and make it like it's a real person going through this stuff. Just because you're not actively complicit in it doesn't mean it's... You know where I'm getting to.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you there, actually, Luke. I think that's a fantastic point.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, well said.
Moving on to a story about Twitter. By the way, you might notice that this week we are not in the 3Deal studio. We are actually in the 3Deal hallway. So we apologise if this sounds slightly different to how we usually do. We've been kicked out by our boss. This week, Instagram CEO Kevin Systrom stated in the company blog, "We are proud to announce that there are now more than 300 million Instagrammers, which means they are officially more users than Twitter, who have 248 million users. Still, not bad though."
Now, luckily for us, the journalists over at Fortune managed to ask Eve Williams, Twitter's co-founder, his thoughts on this, to which his response was,
I frankly don't give a shit if Instagram has more people looking at pretty pictures. That is an exact direct quote.
He did, however, elaborate beforehand, so to give you some context, here is some of the amazing stuff he had to say. Again, to read the full quote, go to our show notes in the description.
It's a question of breadth versus depth. Why is users the only thing we talk about? Asks Williams. If you think about the impact Twitter has had on the world versus Instagram, it's pretty significant. He continues, Twitter is what we wanted it to be. It's a real-time information network where everything in the world happens on Twitter. Important stuff breaks on Twitter, and world leaders have conversations on Twitter. If that's happening, then frankly I don't give a shit if Instagram has more people looking at pretty pictures. There was a great section in there as well where he said that Twitter makes a hell of a lot more money than Instagram, and that's what Wall Street cares about. So that's a little bit of insight into his psyche there. Again, to read the full interview, make sure you check out our show notes for the full quote.
Despite its smaller user base, Twitter's content actually reaches 500 million people a month when you take into account anyone who has seen a tweet embedded in a web page or another app.
That being said, Twitter's growth is slowing last quarter. The company reported a 23% increase in monthly active users, down from the 50% year-on-year growth in 2013, which may put potential investors off. Percentage probably isn't the best way to be looking at these figures though. If I ran a social network that had one user and I got 2 new users, I grew 200%, but that certainly doesn't mean that I'm outperforming Twitter. But moving on now, straight on to driving licenses. Now this is a fascinating piece of news in the tech world, and it really plays into Tim Cook's dream of a walletless society.
The state of Iowa over in the USA have revealed that they are developing a driver's license app, yes, a driver's license app, with an initial pilot program that will begin next year.
This is something I would absolutely love to see drawn out around the world, and certainly in the UK. We recently moved to the card and document counterpart licensing, and I think it's a great progression, but the next progression would definitely be to see your smartphone holding your license, tax discs, and even insurance details. In terms of security, it maybe need another step of verification, because it's very quickly becoming an issue that if you get your phone stolen, you also get your, all your personal information and your identity stolen. A great way to get security on that would be to use maybe Touch ID, maybe retinal recognition, and a PIN code perhaps. But, that's still super, super secure compared to having a piece of paper or a wallet that anybody could take at any time. It's just as dangerous as your banking app, and not as dangerous as Snapchat.
And in terms of convenience, part of Tim Cook's dream is to get rid of wallets, so maybe having a driver's license in your passbook. And moving on from there, we'd like to introduce you to Viber. Known for its military-grade encryption, Viber has emerged as the go-to communications platform for tech-savvy users in the Middle East who want to keep conversations private despite government monitoring.
Many of the app's users live in dangerous countries where interception of text messages by government can mean death or imprisonment, like Iran, Syria and Iraq, where it has seen many of its downloads. However, the potential life-saving app might not be as secure as it's claimed to be.
As we've discovered, in reality, the only data that is encrypted by Viber is text messages, despite the ability to make calls and send both images and video. I know, this is crazy, Luke. Phone numbers and contact information are not encrypted either, potentially putting the lives of its over 400 million users at risk. The connection that is made when a caller places a call is encrypted, but the call itself, that is the audio data, is not encrypted, and Viber claims to be developing an end-to-end secure call feature that will encrypt all calls. But, when is this coming? If images, videos and calls aren't encrypted, what makes Viber so special?
Even Telecom New Zealand managed to scan its network to replace images it's been sent through Viber before it had arrived to the intended recipient.
So I'm sure if New Zealand can hack Viber, I'm pretty sure anyone else can, especially these kind of world-dominating totalitarian governments that are a risk to all human civilization.
Mate, you're going to get on the wrong side of the New Zealand Special Forces here.
Bring it on. And that's not all. No, Luke, that's not all. We've been doing some more research. And despite the claims of sorting out their encryption, the unencrypted images and video data was still publicly available on Viber's Amazon Web Services repository for absolutely anyone with a little bit of tech know-how to discover earlier this year. I'm talking about April.
I would have put all my research into finding about New Zealand law, but
Not about New Zealand. You have some interesting rumours about the developer, I believe.
I do indeed. There's also been rumours, but because of where the app was founded, it has been used to spy on the users in the countries hostile to Israel, which co-founder and chief Talmon Marco, a former senior member of the Israeli Defense Force, says is untrue.
So the head developer and the chief of this so-called encrypted app being used by militants and freedom fighters worldwide is ex-Israeli Defense Force. Forget that bit. Despite this, jihadis in ISIS are still apparently relying on Viber to communicate as they make their way across Iraq and Syria. When questioned, Talmon Marco replied, "We provide a service that allows people everywhere to communicate. Yes, some people might use technology to do bad things, but we believe the world is a better place when people can communicate."
So does the creator of a technology have a moral responsibility for its use?
The father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, made a famous statement.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Haunting words indeed. Questioning the effect his creation would have on the future of the world, he came to the conclusion that it was the job of a scientist to make something if he or she could, and that it was the job of society to then determine what might be done with it. Which reminds me more recently of the dark wallet.
For those of you who haven't heard, the aim of the dark wallet is to make transactions done with the cryptocurrency Bitcoin almost impossible to trace. Mozilla have actually been reported as trying to get the dark wallet app onto its $25 phone they're developing.
Which is pretty interesting news indeed. And programmer Emir Taki, who is actually tipped by Forbes to be the next billionaire, and who is also Iranian, along with Cody Wilson, the guy who created the 3D printed gun, have been working on the tool in the London squat for the last few years.
When questioned, they agreed that they are comfortable with the possibility of the software being used by extremists in conflicts in Iraq and Syria, and to quote Amir's exact words, "You cannot stop people using technology because of your personal bias. We stand for free and open systems where anybody can participate, no matter who you are."
And personally, I think I have to agree with both him and Robert Oppenheimer. Because if we start limiting our own access to technology purely based on fear, haven't the terrorists won already? And with that, where do we draw the line? Mobile phones and trains were involved in the London bombings, so do we ban those? And should flights also be banned after 9/11? And if not, why should we ban other technology? This route can only lead to a situation where law-abiding people are restricted access to these technologies, but criminals can make full use of them by ignoring the law anyway. Because isn't it the nature of criminality to ignore the law? Apps like Viber and the dark wallet would simply be pushed underground and no real problem solved. And staying on the topic of Bitcoin,
Microsoft have teamed up with BitPay to accept Bitcoins for games and apps, beating both Google and Apple. Microsoft has added Bitcoin as an online payment option in Xbox and Windows online stores. US customers can now purchase games, apps and other goodies with the digital currency by using it to add money to their Microsoft accounts. The transaction is irreversible. The fact that a company with a market capitalization $380 billion have taken to accepting Bitcoin means a lot for the digital currency.
And Eric Lockhart, corporate vice president of the Universal Store at Microsoft, as quoted by CoinDesk, said, "The use of digital currencies such as Bitcoin, while not yet mainstream, is certainly growing. We expect this growth to continue, and allowing people to use Bitcoin to purchase our products and services now allows us to be at the front edge of this trend."
In 2014, Microsoft expects an annual revenue to exceed $86.8 billion. However, it's more than likely that Microsoft will not be receiving it in Bitcoins themselves, which somewhat limits the significance of the announcement, as Microsoft is not really entering into the Bitcoin economy.
Which is certainly a shame for Bitcoin investors everywhere.
This week, Uber has become the least ignorable company in technology, with its whopping 22 headlines in NDTV Gadgets alone, including Brussels to file complaint against Uber, judge bans Uber in Spain, French court to rule Uber ban in new challenge, Uber seizes operations in Delhi, Uber sued for operating illegally in the US city of Portland, Dutch judges ban taxi service Uber Pop, Uber ordered to seize operations in Thailand, Uber is no longer allowed to operate in Hyderabad, and Washington takes on Uber with its own taxi app.
There's some pretty shocking headlines. There's definitely a war against Uber raging at the moment, and we've been discussing our opinions on Uber quite frequently on the show, so we won't drag this out too much, but every single headline seems to point towards people and organisations banning Uber. So Luke, what do you think about this?
I believe that it's mostly down to the sheer destructive abilities and its ability to challenge the heavily lucrative transportation industry, but they're just prolonging the inevitable of what's to come with self-driving cars. It's weird that capitalist governments are banning financially competitive companies. If this company was owned by an established power, they wouldn't have an issue with it. But maybe that's what the problem is, because they're such an unknown company. They don't trust them, and they don't think they're accountable for their own actions, and so they're making them accountable for their own actions by straight out banning them. I don't think it's the right way to go. Would you agree with that statement, Cameron?
I completely agree with you there, Luke, and I've heard some pretty interesting points made both sides of the fence. For example, Hugh Boyes, a cybersecurity expert at the Institute of Engineering and Technology, has said that driverless cars could be used by terrorist hackers in an attack on London, which I think is a bit dramatic because theoretically a potato could be used as a component in an explosive device. Which we did joke about hacking driverless cars on the show, but it's interesting to note that no one is mentioning Amazon's fleet of delivery drones as a possible terrorist threat. So I highly suspect many of these comments are industry motivated, as you've said. And the automobile and personal transport industry has followed a path of steady but incredibly slow technological evolution over the past 130 years, with very few radical changes throughout their history. However, I do think that we're on course for some dramatic change in the next few years, with services like Uber, carpooling and self-driving cars clearly poised to have radical economic, environmental and social impacts, which many private companies, cartels and government institutions simply do not want because they're too comfortable with the status quo. Ridiculous fees for taxis and the like. God, I'm really on a ramble here, aren't I? I do believe that car makers should hit the brakes a little bit and temper expectations, as this technology isn't going to roll out overnight. I think that special lanes for driverless cars would be the most logical first step forward, as I don't think any system, no matter how robust, is bulletproof enough to deal with the chaos and uncertainty of modern roads, especially when you take in adverse weather conditions and just, animals running out in front of the road. So if you'd like to read the headlines that Luke mentioned, you can check them out in the show notes in the description.
So let's move away from the roads and move on to the cycle paths. With New Year's resolutions on the horizon, how are we going to work off that extra bit of winter weight? Maybe the question that most people are asking this Christmas.
Well, with this in mind, our featured app this week is the Strava GPS cycling and running app.
The app allows you to record your runs and rides, tracks your progress, and join in challenges, which is a great way to monitor your progress and fitness levels as they increase.
And of course, having a ton of neat graphics to show how much you've improved over the year would be great motivation for anyone. The social element of this app is one of its most interesting features, with the ability to follow friends and their activities, join clubs, and even create your own clubs.
The app helps you discover the best places to ride and run, with the option to compete against local high scores.
Now Luke, I love cycling and I'm actually planning another trip to Scotland, but this time with my brother later next year, where we're taking a pair of old mountain bikes up on the train to the Isles of Skye for a bit of adventure. So we'll both be using this app, but we know, don't we Luke? We know a local inventor who has gone one step further and created a whole new type of folding bike.
Stuart Lambert, the creator of the Crosshead folding bike, is based just down the road from us actually, and he will soon be launching his fundraising account on Crowdcube. So being a huge advocate of the innovation and entrepreneurship, we would like to wish him the absolute best of luck. To find out more, a link to his website will be available in the show notes. And if you'd like to visit our website, we are aptodatepodcast.3deal, that's the number 3.co.uk. We'd absolutely love to see you there. There's a whole bunch of stuff, such as links to our social media, our Patreon account, and all the articles we speak about, as well as download links, anything you could possibly desire. So make sure you head over.
Me and Luke have floating, talking, animated heads on the website, so check it out.
See you there, and we'll see you next week.